This holiday season, what if you gave yourself the gift of dreaming? Really allowed yourself to play in your dreamscapes, in your imaginations, create the worlds that you say you want, and then give yourself permission to bring some of those creations down into reality. What would you create and why? What would you conjure? And how would those imaginations and conjures create or disrupt the reality that you are currently in? These are some questions and more that I explore with my guest this episode, Kristianna Smith, as we talk about the power and possibilities of dreaming as a strategy for liberation in this present moment. And this episode is called Dreaming as Strategy, or what I call my own work, strategic dreaming. So come along and dream with myself and Kristianna Smith as we talk through what does it mean to ride on our dreamscapes. What does it mean to break the things that don't work for you anymore, while also dreaming of the things that actually can? Well, that's what I'm figuring out now. So come along with me as I journey through this thing called life. My name is Dr. Nicole Truesdell, a 40-something-year-old ex-academic deconstructing from all the things that I was told I was supposed to be in order to figure out what it is and who it is I truly am. This is my abolitionist dreamscapes, so come along with me and strategically dream of the things that can actually make us human once again. All right, y'all, I'm back. I'm here, you're here, and we're here together. Episode 24. Now, this episode, I'm talking with Kristianna Smith, and I will give their bio in a few minutes. And I'm excited for this conversation. We spoke about 2 days after the election in the U.S., so you're going to hear us talk about that and a hell of a lot more in this episode. But this is something that I wanted to kind of sit with for a little bit and marinate as we are moving into this kind of calendar new year, and we are also in the midst of these kind of major astrological planetary shifts that I know many of us are feeling. The outer planets are shifting signs. Pluto's already in Aquarius, so next year we will have Pluto in Aquarius for the full year, no more moving back into Capricorn. And then we're going to be having Uranus and Neptune changing signs along with Jupiter and Saturn. And on top of that, we got a few interplanet retrogrades that are going to take us on some reflective rides next year. Of course, Mercury, but also Venus. And currently, we're in a Mars retrograde, preparing us for the rest that we all need, because next year is about action. It is about taking the things that we have been marinating on, the kind of past that we have been sitting with, the experiences that we must turn into lessons, and now taking all that and putting it into some kind of action, because we have a responsibility to ourselves, to our life, to creating life. Because right now, the things that we are told are living and life giving only cause more death and destruction. They are choking our life and stealing our breath. So if we are told that this is living and creating, but all it is destruction and decay, then we must really turn inward and ask ourselves, what does it mean to find the creator in us? What does it mean to remember that to be human is to be a creator, to be creative? That doesn't mean that you're going to be necessarily making works of art for the masses to sell, but you have to be the creator of your own life. You have to imagine, you have to dream, you have to allow yourself the possibilities of what could be a life. The only way we can do that is if we take back what was stolen from us, which is our breath and which is our bodies. And so this is what Kristianna and I are talking a lot about this episode, as we're also ourselves reflecting upon the reality of the US presidential election and what that truly is going to mean on the ground for many of us. Okay. Now, before I get to the interview and also to Kristianna's bio, I want to give y'all some updates about what's going on with me real quick. Okay. Last episode, I was talking about exchange and transaction. And please check that out, episode 2023. That was just me, myself, and I talking through some concepts and ideas about what does it mean for us to truly engage in more reciprocal exchanges and transactions. And the only way we can do that is if we go back to contracts in a way and understand the purpose of a contract. And so this really had me thinking about my own contracts, my own work, my own business. And so I've been doing some rethinking and revamping for 2025. And so if you want to work with me, again, there's a number of ways you can do so. The first way to do is through my Patreon. And this podcast, Abolitionist Dreamscapes, is supported by my patrons as well. And I want to be able to keep this podcast in the public for free. In order for me to do that, I need to get to at least 100 patrons at the groundscape level. My tiers start at just $5 a month and they go all the way up to $100 a month for folks who want to support my work. And the $5 a month tier really does allow me to keep creating this podcast. I've got 2 more interviews already done, y'all, that will be laid out over the coming weeks. I've got a bunch of guests that are lined up. I'm really excited for what's to come with this podcast. But for me to be able to do this and to get the right equipment and eventually be able to get folks help me with sound and with editing, I just need the support. And so y'all's support really does help. So if you want to ensure that the podcast content is for free and that folks can engage, including yourself, please consider being a patron at $5 a month. If you can do the higher tiers, even better. At the higher tiers, I do dream incubators on the Patreon. We have a book club. Right now, we're reading Pleasure Activism, and I do reflections on the various sections. We read at a pace that is both what I consider slow enough for folks to be able to come in and jump in, but at a progressive enough pace that we are moving through a book. All right. Those aren't the greatest words, but it's the only one that come to mind right now with that. So join me on my Patreon, y'all. There's all kinds of things there. I have my poetry up there. I'm a poet and a number of different writings. So if you want to get more into my content, go ahead and go there. I also I'm also a strategist and a consultant through my firm, Truesdell Associates. So if you want to work one-on-one with me, I offer a retainer model in which you can do individual or group consulting with me, strategizing, coaching, or I also do organizational consulting. So if you want to learn more about that and how I do that through what I call strategic dreaming, which is what we're going to talk about today in this episode, please see my website, drnicoletruesdell.com. And for more of my writings, also join my Substack, which is Dr. Nicole Truesdell, along with signing up for my website newsletter. In the coming year, I will be using my newsletter on my website along with my Substack to keep folks informed about my work and my content and my offerings. Because I'm also going to be shifting more of my online content besides the podcast to my YouTube. So if you do follow me online, TikTok or IG, also follow me on YouTube. Okay, that is Dr. Nicole Truesdell. That is where I will be posting my content going forward, along with dropping a new show that I am working on. I'm really excited for that. I'm still just working out some kind of kinks with right now, but stay tuned because I will be having a new show coming out on my YouTube that will have more content on my Patreon as well. So to be notified of that and more, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube, along with signing up for my newsletter on my website, drnicoletruesdell.com, and my Substack at Dr. Nicole Truesdell. All right. Now let's get to our guest and to this interview. Now, Kristianna Smith, they, is a visionary curious about how we bring our collective imagination to life, as we all are, or as all we should be. Okay. They are a liberation cultural worker. I love that. Published author, facilitator, theater artist, educator, gardener, experienced alchemist, intuitive, and a queer Black abolitionist mama. Intent on bringing the best of our collective imagination to life. They use play and theater as mechanisms to dismantle institutional oppression and take up practices that move us closer to a structurally care-centered world. Kristianna is the cultivator of many projects, most recently a written artwork that seeks to affirm and encourage folks as they seek to align their values with their day-to-day actions. And this is called Seed Packets for Liberated Practice, Harvesting Chaos Collection. Now, to learn more about Kristianna and her practices, you can do so at our website, KristiannaSmith.com. And her socials are Instagram at Harvesting Chaos and TikTok at Mocha Einstein 27. And I will have all of those links, including the direct link to Kristianna's most recent artwork slash book slash workbook that she created in the show notes below. Okay. So, as always, your support is greatly appreciated. I wish you all a great holiday season. I know it's been a rough ass year, but it is in the chaos that we must find our own calm and our own center. And the way we can find our own calm and center, y'all, is to really go internal and allow yourself the imagination and play. So, this is what we're going to talk about in this episode, and really give yourself the permission to play and see what happens, and let me know what happens in the comments below. And comment everywhere, y'all, wherever you're listening to this podcast, whether it be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. All the comments, the likes, the shares really do help. So go ahead and give the gift of a like, share, and a comment as well, because I would greatly appreciate it. All right, y'all. Now let's go to the episode. Hey, folks, welcome back. All right, so I've got a special guest today, Kristianna Smith, who is coming to us from the East Coast, Connecticut, correct?
Connecticut, yeah.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, we're here in Connecticut.
Yes, and we're recording a few days after the presidential election that's come out, and something about both of our work, and I really love Kristianna's work because of the work she does around imagination and dreaming, and the power of imagination is a tool of liberation as an abolitionist, and as somebody who really does believe in the power of strategic dreaming and why our imaginations are so important and our bodies and pleasure then come in part of this. I wanted to ask her to come on today and have us have a conversation, especially in this kind of post-election chaos that we're in the US, about the power of dreaming right now. And can we actually dream as a society when we're also seeing just how sick and ignorant we are as a nation because of how good the strategy of the state has been to remove us from the imagination space? So let's kick it off there. It's your thoughts as we try to get motherfuckers to start to dream outside the colonial project, but it seems that that project has really taken a hold of folks' dreamscapes and brought us into nightmares.
Yeah, so for the past year I have been like deeply invested in just imagination work. I've been like running workshops, I've been doing worksheets, and just talking to people about dreaming, because I had this workshop that I was running, and there was one task in it that was about imagining a future. And people would be like, I had no problem doing all of this self-accountability work, but I cried for 3 days and I hate this prompt and I'm never going to do this imagination thing that you had. And I was like, oh, let's get into that. Why is that happening? That's so weird. Like, this is the place where we get to like just like pretend. But people, like, the grief that comes along with imagination was something that like I very much discovered, right? Because in order to imagine something, we have to, one, acknowledge that we don't have it. And there's grief in that, especially when we're acknowledging things like, I want a world where everyone's safe. And we have to sit inside of, we are not safe in this world. There's grief. There's like stuff that happens to our body in that realization. And then the second thing that happens is that people like are protecting themselves from a future grief. So they're like, I don't want to imagine something too high, because if I do imagine something too good, or I do imagine something too beautiful and it doesn't come into fruition, then I'm going to be disappointed about it later. And I'll be honest that like my child was the one that taught me about disappointment. The first time I ever saw my kid get disappointed, they like flung their body on the floor, and I was like, and my kid like doesn't behave that way, like, and had it up until this point. So I was like, what is happening to you? But it was disappointment. It was, I imagined this thing. I imagined it being this way. I could taste the popsicle that I was going to eat. And then I dropped it on the ground. And now I have to deal with the fact that the popsicle is on the ground and I can't eat it. And I already knew what it was going to taste like. And now I'm dealing with the clash of those two worlds, right? And I think that so many people have been taught to not even try to imagine the taste of the popsicle in this scenario, that they like don't know how. When you're like, hey, what's your favorite flavor of popsicle? People will be like, well, whatever. Right? Because I'm not going to imagine liking anything, because if I imagine liking something, I'm going to shut down immediately. And I think that we can see this reflected in the disappointment people have in their relationships. I think we can see this reflected in the loneliness epidemic. And I think that we see this reflected in our strategies when people cannot do anything except for use their imagining power to help strengthen the state's power of how terrible the state will be. So you can wax poetic about what terrible thing the state is going to do. But when I ask you, okay, what would rebellion look like? What would it look like to do something instead of that? What does it look like to stop that? You freeze up and you don't know. And now you're just in survival around the state's imagined plan rather than any type of imagining of your own. And so, yeah, I've just been in deep practice for like a year of like, how do we get people out of that? Like, how do we actually just come back to square one of like, you are a creative person that can imagine things. And in fact, when you start doom scrolling and doom anxiety spiraling, you are using a creative power in that moment. You're just using it for the worst case scenario. That same exact energy could be placed in the best case scenario. What does that look like on the scale of what you want your front porch to look like? What does that look like on the scale of how you want your relationships to work? What does that look like on the scale of how you make your coffee in the morning, right? Like, can you actually just tap into imagining the best case scenario in these tiny little moments so that if something comes up that you can't adjust to or that like isn't the ideal, you still know it's just a roadblock, but you still understand the destination. And I find, especially over these past few days, like watching people grieve and move, y'all don't have a destination in mind. You're just going the opposite way. And it's like state just keeps setting up cliffs so that you opposite way yourself into their pathway because they have a destination in mind. And like, why don't we have a destination? Like, I have a destination in mind. I'm like, I believe in our collective imagination and our ability to build a structurally care centered world. That is my imagination. I'm interested in how I do that in every single part of my day. But people don't have an internal what they want. If I ask people what they want, they'll tell me 6 things they do not want. And you can't organize against that. You can't, that's not strategy. So yeah.
No, but there's a lot. No, I love that. Let's break that down, y'all. And I think that's really important because you said something really important about the grief, right? The grief. Because when you're disappointment brings grief because you're lacking something and you didn't get it, right? And there's an emotion in the body and it can be overwhelming in the body. But since we're so disconnected from the body and we get these emotions, right? People don't know what to do with not just disappointment, but with the grief that comes along with it, right? Because then that really, and for me, I always tell people the minute you have that disappointment or grief, that tells you your attachments to a structure that you think that you want to push back against, right? So now you're realizing parts of you have to die, right? Like grief is death. Grief brings
Mm-hmm.
up a death, right? And a rebirth
Mm-hmm.
thing. And if we are dying, people love talking about astrology. We talked about this earlier, like about Pluto, and Pluto's been dog walking all of us for a minute. And being out of Capricorn, Pluto has shown us the systems and structures that need to die in order to transform. And now moving into Aquarius is going to show us, and it's a collective, what needs to die to be transformed. And I think what we're realizing is what needs to die, right? Part of our construction of who we think we are is that we have to let go of giving up our imaginations to somebody else, which means that you got to actually sit in that body that you don't take care of, that you are afraid to acknowledge, that you don't want to lead. Because if you actually, what you said, if you actually acknowledge what you wanted by sitting in what you desire, that's a truth telling that will most likely be contradictory to what you have told yourself you really do like or supposed to be in, right? And then that's what you hit
Yes.
on. That's what I'm
Yes.
hearing. You hit on somebody. You hit on somebody being like, I don't like this motherfucker I'm in dead bed with, but I got to be with him. And now you're like, what's your dream? My dream is to be frolicking on an island somewhere, but you don't see that partner that you've been with for a long time in that. Oh shit! Now you got confronted with yourself.
Yeah, right. And I think like one of the things I was talking with a friend about was like, we sit here, we say we want systems change, and we say that the system doesn't work, and we say that we want land back. And one of the things that I find opportunity in this moment, right, is that system like this system is not going to continue the way that it has been continuing, right? The colonial project is shifting no matter what. This
Yep.
this phase whatever you want to call this of the colonial project is falling apart. So there are options, right? And one of the very clear options is authoritarianism. That is a very clear option. The other option is liberation. But we have to be able to imagine that. We have to be able to envision that. And I don't know how any of y'all are envisioning that when you don't like anybody you spend time with. When you can't envision picking up the phone and asking somebody to help you with childcare.
Yeah.
Like, y'all really are out here like, we're like, and da 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 da, bang on the drum. But I'm like, okay, so what do you want your life to look like? And you tell me 17 don'ts. Cool. What do you want it to look like? Have you spent time sitting inside of like what it feels like to live in your neighborhood in a place that feels good to you? What does that feel like? And what I know to be true, as somebody who lives their life unapologetically, very loudly, and very much am like in constant search for like what I want my life to feel like, right? Like I actually do want to live in a community. I want to live in a community that like everybody has a garden and everybody says hi to each other and our kids can run freely and aren't going to get hit by cars and there are no cops and we're healthy and we're safe, and that the majority of every day is just spent like doing what feels good for the body and for the community, and not in like this grindy culture for some random labor that has some theoretical good for some billionaire somewhere down the line. I have a very clear idea of what I want. And so our entire front lawn is a garden. It's like the most beautiful garden that I could imagine. It has like arches and flowers and fruit trees and all of this stuff. And when we started building it, the immediate response of people, it was the coldest day in January when we started laying the foundation for the garden, and every single one of our neighbors, including the elderly, came outside. Like immediately all of these people started like flocking to our garden because they wanted to know what we were doing. And when we told them, they got excited. And now people, this is their walking path. This is their, like, they are attracted to my imagining because I'm 100% inside of my imagination. But while we were building it, people were like, well, this is going to be a lot of work. Well, I didn't think that the city let people do this. Well, and it was just like constant barrage
Policing.
of the limits of somebody else's imagination. Yeah, policing, but also like this, like, I have disappointment that I don't have that thing, so I don't want you to have that thing. Or people straight up being like, you guys are doing such a good job. You're making us look bad so you can calm down. Right? And I'm like, bitch, this isn't about you. You can have a fruit tree in your yard. You live in the same climate. A fruit tree. There are some fruit trees that cost under $50, y'all. If you don't know, you could buy, if you can order DoorDash or whatever, Grubhub, whatever sort of fast food, you could order a fruit tree because that's how much they cost. And sometimes they're even cheaper. Some places give them to you for free.
Mhm.
Like, we have the capacity to all do this, but you can't imagine doing it. And that's really where the differential happens, right? But I see just in the way that we have lived our lives and like really investing, like, oh, I imagined that thing, so I did it. And I have friends who are like, you come up with an idea, then you make a plan and then you do it. And I'm like, I don't know what you just said. That's supposed to be the confusing part for me. Because I have a Capricorn stellium and the rest of my chart is fire. So I be just doing my shit. I'm just like, okay, I thought of it. Now I want to do it. Cool. Sounds great. Let's go.
But I think,
But people don't have that. And it's not.
yeah, and I think that's something really important you just said is that this idea that when you show the template, right, instead of people seeing it as a space to allow their curiosity and creativity to be enticed, to be awakened, to be seduced, right, into figuring out what they can do, it's almost like, but now you're making me look bad. Right. Or now I am
Yes.
taking on what you have done. And now I have been punitive to myself. I'm judging myself now instead of looking at it and being like, well, shit, oh, I can actually do that. Right. And I think that is what queerness is.
Yes.
This is why queerness is so threatening
100%.
to people, right? Because it's difference. It's sitting in difference and being like, no, I can be different this way. You can be different your way, and we can all be in this thing called life together differently, but just don't shit all over my humanity and I won't shit all over yours. And if we don't shit all over each
Boom.
other, then the foundation of what we're building doesn't even have room for this police state, because that's allowing us to actually be different, right? And it's really that simple, but then it becomes really hard because we have been taught our whole life to fear difference. right? Like they
Yeah. Yeah. And we've been taught to assimilate, right? Like we have been taught to find the place that we assimilate into. And and so one of the things I joke about is like, I'm going to go at 10, so some of y'all go to a 3, right? Like I actually need us to be at an average of 5, but I'll go all the way to the extreme, all the way over there. So that y'all, I will make my whole garden as big as I can make it. So some of you plant 4 more flowers in the front of your houses, which definitely happened. We had neighbors also who were like, well, we've lived here for 10 years and we've thought about doing this thing, but you all did this whole thing. Because we started building 4 months after we moved in.
Mm.
So we didn't wait. It was like we moved in the fall and we started building in the winter so that by spring we could start planting. So for other people, they were like, you got here and you immediately just did it. And I was like, yes, that is true. And so then we had neighbors who were like, well, we've thought about doing this for 10 years. Well, we've been thinking about doing this for 5 years and we just never did it. But like, why didn't we do it? And we're like, yes, why didn't you do that? And like, so much of it is like, I was trying to be the same. I was trying to keep up with the Joneses. Those people over there don't like that kind of difference. So I was trying to stay in line, but you're over here being all the way out there. So now I can make my little tree fence that I wanted to make, but I was a little nervous to make, or I could go ahead and I could plant, some more like flowers or a little garden in this corner because now there's this other thing that like you're holding the space of a lot of difference, which I also think is within this system of trying to get people to stop assimilating is the issue also in queerness, because people go from assimilating into white supremacy into thinking that there's an assimilation into queerness. And I think also like even just noticing the ways in which people have tried to like create an aesthetic of queerness that's still sort of somehow wrapped up in white supremacy, that's still sort of set up in a you know what I mean? They're
Yes.
like, oh well, this is what it is to be queer, and you're like, queer means nothing. It means the fluidity of all things. It means that we all have space. My Venus is a Sagittarius. Don't try and put me in a fucking box, bro. Like I like it's all of it. And some of you don't know how to leave your assimilated zone until you can hop into a different assimilated zone. And that's also where your imagination is failing you, because now you're going into survival mode because you hopped out of a box into the openness of the air. And now you're like agoraphobic at the idea of imagining whatever you want.
Our imaginations are lacking because we don't have our history. Like we don't
Yes.
have the historical context. We don't understand that people were always making a way differently. And many people sat outside the law, sat outside the structures because they knew they couldn't fit in, especially our elder queers, right? And I think that we forget like the kink scene, the bears, the leathers, right? All of those different populations were unapologetically out loud and they were putting that shit in public. And the last couple of years when we're hearing the younger generation of queer folks, queer kids, honestly, saying like that's not appropriate or blah, blah, blah. It's like, whose perspective are you using? And why do we assume that every single space is supposed to be for everybody when we are actually saying we need to create different spaces so people can express their humanity? And then when we're coming together, it
Yes.
allows us to be like we have lost the sauce, I think, because we've lost our histories. And that doesn't allow us to also have the imaginations. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I think that that's so valid. I also think that like within this, like the first thing that I thought of was like black queer gay marriages in the 20s. Like that was the first thing that I thought of. And thinking about how the one thing that black queer people have been able to do throughout time very successfully is live out loud under the radar because nobody gives a fuck about whether or not they're good or bad, right?
Yeah.
And like the amount of survival that exists when you are and when you are actively unseen by the system. And that's not to say that there isn't harm, but there is like ways to use that to your advantage. And I made a video a few days ago that was like, I need more of you to learn rules and to learn how things have worked so you can break them in ways that make sense.
Yes.
Because there is strategy to how we break shit apart. There is strategy to how we break rules. There is strategy to how we defy and when we choose to defy what situation, right? And I need you to understand that it feels like a very key part. And that is historically understanding why things work the way they work where you're at. right? Like whether that's a local government or a PTA or like queer history, like understanding why certain people have been able to make the gains that they've made and why other people haven't. One of my favorites is Lily Tomlin, who isn't a person of color, but Lily Tomlin is like, fuck gay rights. She's like, what do you say? She'll be like, what, why is everybody happy about gay marriage when at the end of the day we still have like shit on gay, like we're still like capturing gay people's rights to do things. Like
Yeah.
gay marriage isn't actually helping everybody, right? And that isn't to say let's throw away gay marriage, but it is to say let's understand that gay marriage was a strategic advantage. It wasn't a perfect all like end all be all for the system. And because y'all don't understand where we came from, you think we already arrived. And so now you think we're just going back, and like even the languages, we won't go back, but we're not talking about moving forward anymore. And that's a strategic part of the state, right? Like Democrats could have said 50 years in the future, we're headed to the da-da-da. You know what I mean? Like we could have been having messaging about the next phases of what it is to be a human being on the planet at this moment. We're not having that conversation. We're having stand still or go back conversations because y'all don't even have a perspective to again understand, to Sankofa, go back and get it and like move us forward to where we're headed, and
Yes.
not just like hanging out in this spot.
And I think that is why the state is so good at doing what it does. It takes time and it stops it for us, right? And this is why, if you think
Yes.
about it, it's why we're so stagnant. And I said this to somebody, and I don't know if I'll keep it in the podcast or not, but when we talk about this, is where I think the idea of spirituality is coming in now, and spirit and ancestors is also part of this conversation about imagination. But also we have to remember that those of our oppressor also have their ancestors too, right? And we have to remember
Yes.
that we are engaging in not just a mundane, but a sacred type of resistance and a sacred type of, honestly, warfare. We have to remember who our oppressor is by understanding who their ancestors were. And let's be real, their ancestors did not cross over. Their ancestors did not sit there and have the reflection. They're on these folks' backs right now, and that's why they stink. You are smelling the dead on folks who are being stagnant right now. And their ancestors are saying, we don't want anything to change because we are not going to reflect and face ourselves. We are going to continue to regurgitate ourselves in these fucking bloodlines so that
Yes.
now you
Yes.
will become more and more stagnant. And if we do not understand that that is how they have maintained power, and that is why they're asking us to constantly explain ourselves, to constantly take away gatekeeping, to constantly tell us, well, educate us more, especially Black women. Let me cry at your feet and ask you to use your titties as pillows once again, right? It's because their dead need to
Mm-hmm.
continuously try to suck your life. And I think that is something that
Yes.
allows us to suck our imaginations, right? Because we don't know our ancestors, and our ancestors right now are like, y'all motherfuckers got us all fucked up because this is not getting us free.
Right. And I mean, even those people are not listening to all of their ancestors. Do you know what I mean? Like we fundamentally, like my Black kin are interspersed with Irish folks who were colored Irish folks, right? Like for the time. That they obviously still had white skin. But I just mean that like there are people of European descent who did not assimilate into whiteness
Yes.
intentionally, right? And so like we are also losing the plot of like you're allowing the narrative to be around whiteness, but some of y'all's ancestors don't give a fuck about whiteness and are actually probably working against you a lot of the time because you're out here against all of the shit that they actually like wanted and spoke to, and they are just as mad about these fucking systems. And then like you're over here now like, well, I spoke to one of my white ancestors and now you're stepping on top of Black folks, and they're like, sit your ass down and listen. And that's actually what I need a lot more people to do. I actually need a lot more people to stop think taking or think piecing on like what they think the next piece is supposed to be. Cause y'all need to sit. You don't know. Take a seat. Listen to somebody. I don't care if you listen. I don't care if you just like meet three of your neighbors, but I need you to stop projecting your assumptions. The blue bracelet thing, I would like it to go away. Like, I don't need another accessory out here telling me what you think you know. I need you to tell me where you're going to put your resources. I don't need a safe space. I create safe space. I
I know
create
that's
a
right.
community of safe space. I don't need somebody else to create that shit for me. In fact, I actively tell all of my friends, if your houses are ever destroyed, we will figure out for everyone to come live with me.
Yeah.
I am very aware of like what my purpose, like I know what my spiritual purpose is, right? And like I know that I was given an assignment to not build an ark, because that's like a little weird, but to build a safe house, right? Like there are those of
Mhm.
us who have already been building safe houses. We don't need bracelets, we don't need hats, we don't need tears. We already got that shit under control. What I need you to do is have expectations for your husband.
Yeah.
I would like you to please have a conversation with your in-laws. Like that's actually what I need you to make the work, right? I need you to actually be actively teaching your children what resistance looks like and how to be a shield for resistance. And I need you to be willing to put your kids out there too, not just you. Because if I know that my baby is already ready, my kid has been to a protest, right? My child is 6.5 years old. They have been to a protest, they've held a sign, they've been on a march, like they've already done that work. So if my 6-year-old child could do it, so can your kids. Like, why aren't you doing that work for me? And then where this comes into imagination work is like, I truly believe that the part of us that is able to imagine is connected and does extend into the fourth dimension. This is like how I believe, right? I think the part of us that's able to imagine things is able to glimpse beyond space and time.
Mhm.
And one of the first things that like sort of came to me when I was like reflecting after the election was like, if we have the capacity to glimpse all of space and time, if there's something within us that has the ability to look at all of time, then we are actually strategizing with people who are in this moment, right? Because if we can look at all of time, then all of time is happening simultaneously on top of each other. It's not
Yes.
linearly. It is collectively, right? So in this moment, I am not just strategizing with people on boats, and I am not just strategizing with people in cages, and I'm not just strategizing with people on the fields, but I'm also strategizing with people who don't even understand the idea of captivity. And I'm also strategizing with people who already broke free.
Yes.
And to me, imagination is allowing my spirit and my consciousness to glimpse and hold on to that level of being so that I can pull down from that and be like, oh, let me yank some of that freedom work. Let me, like, I do an exercise with folks where I'm like, imagine the worst case scenario. What are the people in the rebellion of that moment doing? Backtrack. Okay, what could you be doing inspired by that imagined scenario? Right? Like,
Yeah.
there's actual strategy in the work of envisioning things, but we have to still be moving towards a world in which no one is free. And one of the things that I think happened, especially around Palestine, especially around like learning about the amount of genocides that are happening on the planet and coming to terms with the impact of climate crisis on on US soil, right? Is that people had to sit with like, do I actually imagine, like, do I actually believe that there could be a universe where people are at war?
Yeah.
Do I actually believe in myself that peace, meaning the absence of war, is possible? Do I believe that? I had to sit with myself about it. I was like, do I actually like, and I found, when you like start digging, it's like almost weeding a bed. You
Yeah.
start going inside of your consciousness and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like I'm picking out all this shit inside of me that I didn't know was in there. But there was something inside of me that was like, well, war is necessary. And I was like, bitch, where did this come from? I didn't want this here. That was not supposed to be growing inside of me. That's not necessary like that. Flick. No, no, thank you. I can actually imagine a world in which we are not at like imperial levels of war. I can imagine that. Do I imagine a world in which we don't beat each other up sometimes? No, I can't imagine a world in which we don't beat each other up sometimes. I'm going to leave that to the next generation. But I don't think we have to do it with drones and bombs and nuclear weapons and like destroying the planet. Do I imagine a world in which we can get people to safety so they are continuously destroyed by climate crisis? I can't imagine that world. So
Yeah.
can you actually imagine a structurally care centered world where the goal, the purpose of all larger structures, state or otherwise, are to support the people within them? to care for the people within them, where housing and food and education and recreation and shelter are all, healthcare are all just given. Like that's just like everybody's okay, everybody's taken care of, period. Can you imagine that? And if you can't, what I actually need your work to be is that you sit the fuck down until you can. And then you can figure out where you join the movement. But some of y'all, again, can't imagine your husband picking up a dish. And like at the end of the day, you are a strain on the rest of us until you can imagine a little bit more than that.
But I think here, but I want to pick up on that last piece because that's exactly what it is. But I think part of the piece reason you can't imagine until you believe your reality, right?
Yes.
I think that's a lot of times too. People are still running from their reality. So to imagine how you are doing, like what you are saying, and it's so beautiful, they can't because then you would have to come into you would have to find your feet. Something that I do a lot with people is
Yeah.
when I try to bring them into an incubator, you get the whole grounding thing, right? I ground a little differently. I like to ground
Mm-hmm.
by turning the body on physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, you feel your feet, let's move it up to your head. Now drop back down. Where's your feet again, right? And it's like because we have to
Mm.
remember that you have a body and that is what is feeding that so-called spirit. Because you have to imagine
Yes.
war in order to get peace. You have to believe the absolute vile things humans have done, can do, and will continue to do in order for you then to be able to truly imagine a world of peace. You have to believe that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why the Handmaid's Tale
Mm-hmm.
pissed me off. White women, Margaret, even Margaret said, "Yes, bitch, I done taken all this shit from history. I just took history and put white women in the middle. That's what I did, right? But white women, because you refuse to believe your reality that yes, you may be the victim of the Christian patriarch, but you are also the one that raised the Christian patriarch. You are the one that raised the white patriarch. Until
Yes.
you believe that
Yes.
shit, right? You will never imagine your freedom because you are still pissed off that not only does that man have his foot on your neck, you know he has his neck because you raised that motherfucker to have his foot on another woman's neck,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the
Yes.
reality check we have to have to dream like you're saying.
And to acknowledge that you did that because you thought you would be, because you already gave up the dream, because you raised your kids that way because you believed you would be safer under the known system, under the known circumstances. And that's why this moment in particular, you can tell me what the astrology is again, but like this moment in particular is hard for people
Yes.
because there is no stability. And there won't be. We are in a moment of change. And I hear so much like pleasure activism and specifically like Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic and what you're saying right now, because she doesn't describe, when she uses of the erotic, even how she describes the erotic is not about feeling goodness. It is the chaos of our strongest feelings,
Yeah.
all of them. And it's the intention of that piece is to talk about the difference between the pornographic, aka this thing that you are fed, where if you have the right cup and you have the right house and you have the right husband and you have the right kid and you have the right whatever, that is a facsimile of life that is good, and you can hold on to that illusion,
Yes.
right? And what Audre Lorde says is that the erotic is the chaos of our strongest feeling. And that once we know what it is to feel good, we also know what it is to feel bad. And when I know what it is to feel bad, I have clarity around what I'm moving against. But some of y'all don't want to feel bad.
Yes.
It's very easy for me to see how quickly people will try to transmute their grief into positivity, when what you're actually doing is you're avoiding all of the lessons that grief has to offer. In my book I call it composting towards pleasure, and it's what I talk about
Mm.
self accountability and grief together as compost. And compost is literal shit. It is literal poop. It is decaying matter. And it's what happens when all of the stuff that we can't eat anymore, that can no longer fuel this body, is allowed to break down together. It's able to fuel the next thing. Right?
Yes.
So I take that compost and I use it to nurture the other things. But I have to still smell the compost. I gotta still put the shit in there. I have to still put the decayed matter in there. I have to still deal. I gotta turn it. I gotta water it. I gotta still deal with the feelings. And the reality that I'm living, that I'm raising a child that inside of this system that does not care for her wellness, that does not care for her wholeness, that does not care for her dignity. I have to live inside of that system. I have to live inside of the reality of what this world wants to do to my body, to my being, to my family, to my home, to my loved ones. I have to know what that is, the truth of what it is and what it feels like. And one of the things that's been happening recently is, because this is how I've raised my child, right? Is to feel all of their feelings. My kid feels things that I still haven't realized I avoid. So my kid just found out, like, heard about a child activist who grew up in a worker, like a children's worker camp. And my kid, like, cried for 2 days around, not solid, like on and off, because that's how kids be. They'd be like, I had that feeling, but now I'm coming back to it again, right? Because that's actually how grief works. But was like, so kids get put in prisons and they can't go to the bathroom without asking, and they can't see their moms and dads, and like it was, and she was feeling the whole of the emotion, like inside of their body. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I was witnessing them, noticing that I wasn't. And I had to sit with, like, ooh, I'm a parent, and I am protecting myself of what it feels like to have to think about parents and children being separated in this way. And my kid is feeling that full emotion, and now my kid is ready to go rage, and now my kid is ready to do these things that I am complacent in this moment, because I'm not allowing the fullness of the feeling to come in. Right? Like, even in this moment, I can feel myself sort of smiling to avoid feeling it, even right now. And
Yeah.
so, these are the moments that, like, this is like a larger systemic idea, but to know that, like, even if we're good at it, even if we talk about it, even if we, like, understand good at it, whatever, that we are still constantly decolonizing our consciousness. And there's so much grief, not just in our bodies, but in the, like, we're processing, again, like, we're doing this all together, so we're processing so much grief at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm processing the grief of the land that I'm on, where, like, my land and the spirit and connectivity of the land that I am on right now, which has been so loving to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, this land lost children. Like, this land had its children taken from it. And, like, I'm a parent. Oh my gosh, what would I do? Like, I would burn everything down. And there would be forest fires every second if I had what this land had, right? Like, if I had the loss that this land had. Like, really tapping in to that, both spiritual, historical, like, generational, environmental, right, connection, to say, if when we feel all that grief and we allow it to be held by those bigger structures, right? Now we're not only holding it in the body, we're allowing the body to be the messenger line. What comes through at the end of that grief is the imagination work. What comes through at the end of that grief is, and now that you understand the pain and you've processed some of the reality, now I know what needs to go get fixed. But some of y'all are out here trying to fix things, and you can't see what needs to be fixed
Yeah.
because you're not processing it.
And
And
this is
that's why it's bad. Like, that's why you break things.
But this is also, but you're also explaining very well why dreaming is so violent to the state, and why it's
Yes.
a actually a tool of freedom making and taking, right? Because that's why they stole our rest. Because
Right.
when you actually allow yourself to grieve, and this is why they don't allow us to grieve either. If we think about even the collective grief we have not allowed ourselves to feel from COVID, and from
Yeah.
everyone we lost from them, that's very recent, right? On top of state sanctioned violence, on top of historical violence, right? If you actually felt, if you actually allowed yourself to grieve, if you opened up the body, right, and you actually did
Yeah.
all the spiritual stuff people say they
Yeah.
do and tall your ancestors down, then you're also processing the grief of your ancestors, right? You are processing ancestral grief. all of us in different ways. It's not going to necessarily be the same, but we're all processing it differently when you actually get in the body and believe the goddamn vessel that holds the spirit, because that's where we come from, right? And so we're
Yeah.
processing the grief. If you got Black folks, you're processing the grief of being stolen, right? And having to work land that also was grieving, like you said, who didn't ask to be complicit in this shit, who didn't ask to
Yeah. Yeah.
hold the nooses on the damn branches of the trees as they strung us up in order to make people
Yeah.
fear the state, right? But also white folks, if you actually felt the grief, you would actually realize that your ancestors got lied to. You gave up rich histories, rich lands, rich cultures that move beyond whiteness. So your ancient, your primordials, I would actually argue, are pissed off. And they should be blocking y'all's asses because you stink, because you got the rot of those motherfuckers who did not turn
Yes.
around and face themselves. And so what Kristianna is also saying, I think is really important. You got to be fired up. My Leo's fired up because it's really important, right? Is this idea of ensuring that we self-reflect, because if you don't face yourself when you're alive, you won't face yourself when you're dead. And if you don't turn around and face the scales, right? I'm tired of some of y'all spiritualists too. And I really mean it actually with love, because you are fucking with energies you don't understand. You want to talk to Hecate. You want to talk to Isis. You want to talk to Loki. You want to talk to all these primordials, yet you won't talk to yourself or you're dead. And that's why shit is being blocked. Because there is an order to things for a reason. It's a hierarchy outside of the violence of the colonial for a reason, right? And I think when you don't allow yourself to grieve and you don't allow your dead to grieve, right, there is no space for the imagining. But that's what the colonials said. That's why it took our rest, because if you did do all that shit and you did imagine, then you would ask yourself, what do I really want? And if you
And that,
go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead. Because I'm like, but I think like I have been having to remind people of like our past 5 years, like over and over recently. I've had to be like, by the way, this is happening right now. Like we actually have the example right now, which is y'all were at home trying
Yes.
to figure out how to do home life by yourselves. Not everybody is at home, right? But y'all were at home trying to figure out how to do home life by yourselves, getting checks sent to you from the government, everybody having house care, nobody being kicked out. And then all of a sudden the state was like, get out of your house, get out of your house, go on a trip, go do it, get out of the, go back to the office, go do it. And the reason was because y'all sat there for a second and went, hold up. So y'all could just send us money? Hold up, so you don't have to kick, so people don't have to get kicked out of their house. Wait, you can pause mortgages so that people don't have to get kicked out of their house. Wait, you can do that? How many things have we been told the state cannot do? And in the year 2020, they did it. Under a Trump presidency, they did it. And I think that we need to be very clear that when it behooves the state's going to care about you. When they showed, it's not that they can't care about you. And now what we have to live with right now is to say this authoritarian was in government at the head office and actively took care of people, right? Actively figured out, not to the extent, like, I'm not going to sit here and be like everything was perfect, but like did a bunch of shit to take care of people and then pulled it back fast. And so what that tells me is not that all of these things are not possible, not that the state doesn't know how to do them. I'm always like, if the state has a number, they have a plan, right? There's a number for how to solve homelessness. If there's a dollar amount next to that, that means somebody already wrote the plan. So there are plans about how to have a world that is not this world. It already exists. It's a choice to not say all student loans are forgiven. It's a choice to not put a moratorium on mortgages until interest rates go down. It's a choice to not like allow people the decency of finding housing and the decency of being fed, right? Those are choices the state makes. And I think that what some of you are having to reel with, because you have now lived through the reality that we can't take care of people when it behooves the state, you're sitting in, do I still agree with the state? But here's the reasons why they can't just keep doing that. Okay, well, all of those reasons are bullshit.
Yes.
Like, it happened. We lived through it. Y'all keep acting like we didn't, but we actively lived through things where the state made choices that behooved it because it was like, I don't want to kill off the whole populace, until they found out that they were going to lose too much ground. They were like, no, 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 they're organizing. They're figuring out mutual aid. They're figuring out health. No, 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 no. Put them back out. Everything's fine now. Get them out of the house. Because when we let them, they're uprising in the middle of the streets because they have time to talk to each other. So these are not theoretical things that we're talking about. It's not no, it's because we have to work so hard. It's like, no, we can actually see very actively in the last 4 years of our history what it looks like when people have time to listen to each other, when people have time to rest, and when people have time to organize, and how quickly and effective they can be when they do that. And the state said, fuck no, everybody go back to work. There's stop, let's start a war in this way. You know what I mean? Like, the state really quickly tried to fuck y'all up. And instead of going, oh, we could actually take that as a signal that these things are possible, and now we can organize and say, well, if y'all did that, I know you could do more.
Yes.
Y'all went back to, well, like, I don't know, like, the inflation's high. And it's like, come on.
Yes, but it also, and it's a good example, and it shows us just how good the state is at doing its job,
Yes.
right?
Because we could have rebelled.
We could have rebelled.
We could have broken the state.
So then what's our allegiance to it, right? And I think that's the hard pill to swallow. That's the self-reflection that we all have to do in order to make sure that we're not taking what already is into the so-called new future, right?
Yeah.
We should have understood the template for Trump, because we already went through that motherfucker, right? But here we are again. We don't believe our realities. We want to sit in the kind of delusions that if we do one action, that one action is what is going to get us a so-called future. That is not an action. That is a tool, right? And it just shows just how docile we all are. There's a docile nature to the American nation state in particular, which I think a lot of other people are trying to tell us. They're like, y'all, listen, we've been through this shit too. Y'all really are cute, but y'all ain't really doing what you think you are doing, right? It's because even though we think we're big and bad, we've actually been made to be scared little children.
Augusto Boal called it cops in the head. Are you familiar with Augusto Boal's work? Yes. Augusto Boal was a revolutionary theater maker in Brazil, and he got kicked out of Brazil, and he moved Brazil or Argentina. I always mix this up. I want to say it's Brazil, so we're gonna say. But if it's Argentina, yell at me in the comments or whatever. But like he moves to France, and he's like, the French like have life so easy, da 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 da. Until he noticed that they had behaviors that were very similar to what an authoritarian military regime was in his home country, and he goes, "Oh, the reason y'all don't have cops on the street is because everybody's walking around with a cop in their head." Americans have cops in their heads and on the street, and that's why y'all don't know the difference. that's why it's like the Matrix, where like anybody can become Agent Smith. Like, that is how Americans are indoctrinated, and that's how they're trained to be. And some of y'all don't know how, even when you get into like social justice spaces, you actually don't know how to step away from cop logic.
It gets worse.
It's so deeply inside of you.
Yes, it gets worse. It can get worse in justice spaces. It can get really bad in justice spaces, because when the idea of liberation is tied to a script of perfection, right, or a utopian of this is how you have to do, right, y'all, that is another form of self-policing. Because if you are afraid in a justice space, and I've said this over and over again, I'm going to keep saying this shit, because I still believe those spaces, we need those spaces, but those spaces have to abolition themselves a bit right now.
Yes.
If you cannot give you permission to really express your needs, if you are all queer or all Black or all whatever it is in these spaces committed to the justice and liberation, and you don't feel as if you can lay on that floor and fall out and say, I'm fucking tired, I need some help, because you're afraid of what other people will say, or that you're not committed enough, that is not a justice space. That is another space of surveillance, y'all.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I agree with you said too, because the thing is idea of creating safe spaces, we have to kind of move that language a bit for me as well,
Agreed.
because because how are you going to create safety in an unsafe world when you're too afraid to tell yourself honesty? So it's really about how do you create spaces for yourself to fully express your humanity. And I think that's what you do really well, Christiana, honestly, like for
Thank you.
yourself is, and the template for it, right, is if you can live out loud your way, that is how you create safety for you, because your honesty with yourself will then allow you, when your body is giving you a reaction that is counter to what everyone else in the space is telling you, but your body is saying, get the fuck out of here. This is not right for you. This is not right. You will
Yeah.
believe that over falling in with the group.
And this is why like for me, I find it so interesting the way people push up against transformative justice, like real transformative justice, not the
Yeah.
word, not the like facsimile that that the state is trying to make, but spaces where people are like, hey, we're going to be really fucking messy and we're not going to get it right, and at the end of the day, if somebody wants to keep doing harm, they're going to keep doing harm, so we just have to figure out how to put better boundaries around them. And y'all are actually ready to do that work because you want to have a space that's perfectly curated. And maybe it's not a Stanley Cup. Maybe it's like a mason jar instead of a Stanley Cup. And it's like one of those weird, like macrame, like shawls instead of a cardigan. But it's still an aesthetic that you still, you know what I'm saying? You're still trying to hit an aesthetic that you think is going to broadcast safety. I'm drinking, I don't even know what kind of cup this is, but I got it on auction with another cup for $2 because I buy things secondhand because I'm poor.
That's to me is why we have to come back to art and music and our hands again, right? And the earth again, as a way to figure out what does it mean to create again, because I don't think we know how to create anymore. We do know how to reproduce.
Yes. And this is actually why I want to talk about two points really quickly. One is that this election was so many people being disenfranchised by the state, whether it is like
Yes.
through actual voter like
Yes.
suppression or by people internally being like, because I don't know the perfect choice, I'm not going. And if you look at the numbers, that's actually what the numbers say. And I'm like annoyed with every single person that says any fucking different because I'm like, the actual conversation right now is people didn't vote.
Yeah.
And either because they were stopped from voting or because they didn't go to the polls. But the numbers tell us that people didn't, like I think it's like almost 30 million people that did not did not
Crazy.
cast a ballot in comparison to 2020. And that to me is a bigger story because my other thing is like, if those 30 million people went home and organized instead, then I wouldn't give a fuck about who won. You know what I'm saying? You
Fact.
didn't go cast a ballot, but you started a little food system. You started a little neighborhood walk where y'all talk and hang out. If those 30 million people said, I'm fuck a ballot, but I'm gonna organize my 4 closest neighbors instead, I would not give a fuck. Because that would be revolutionary. But what
Yes.
happens is we put people in a place where we do stagnation or urgency. Right? This is the nonprofit structure in a nutshell. It's stagnant, like do the same thing, or panic and run around in a circle. Right? Like those are our two ways of doing a thing. And I'm like, I don't like either of these ways. Why don't we make a plan? Again, Capricorn stellium, Capricorn sun, Capricorn a lot. Okay, I'll give you my chart one day. But like, why aren't we making a plan, like an actual plan that so that we can be like, oh, here are some of the options that we have. Should those options arise? Because that's definitely what the state does. The state has plans. We sit around like, oh my gosh, my one option broke. And to come back to your point around art and around creating things, so I wrote my book. My book is like, I say wrote because people started telling me I had to say write, but it's like mostly poetry. It's mostly visual. It's like full color, and it's mostly like moving. It's like moving through. I call it a written art piece. That's my preferred way of talking about it. But like people have picked it up and been like, I've never had anything like this. And I was like, I was not going to write something that's just like white pages with black print because people can't process this. You know what I'm saying? You need to have an emotional experience. So there's like playlists that are linked because I have a friend that does embodiment work. So it's like dance here, move here, process this way. Here's a poem, here's a story, do you know what I mean? Like it
Yes.
is moving, to me, it is moving through what actual liberatory practice is like. And even in the creation of that, I was confronted with like, is this a real book? Should I tell people about it? Should I actually give it to folks? Like da 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 da. Because I was like, this isn't how we normally talk about these things. This isn't how we normally process these things collectively. But I fundamentally believe in our capacity to create stuff together and to make different ways of understanding information. And if we look at certain social medias when they popped off, right? Whether it's like connecting children like Facebook, that's why Facebook popped off. Whether it was this idea of being able to like hit like a bunch of different small thoughts, which is why Twitter popped off, or like suddenly being able to like share images, which is why something like I could go through every single one, like every single social media and be like, the reason this popped off is because it was offering us an opportunity to share in a way that we didn't typically share. Y'all, how do you create with the people around you? How do you actually cultivate projects that are co-creation with the folks in your neighborhood? We have an abolitionist library. And when we first put up the library, I didn't say this is an abolitionist library. I just put up the library and filled it with books that were like queer and black and like radical, right? And somebody put a book that was like about Jesus, like had moved all of my queer books. Didn't take my queer books out, but moved all my queer books aside and like sort of highlighted a book about Jesus and highlighted a book about what police do. And I was like, fuck this. And so I like took those books out. I think I threw them in the trash, but like hashtag it's fine. And I put aside, and I was like, this is what it means to be an abolitionist library. I put a little info sheet inside, and I was like, we are imagining all the stories in this box are imagining a world outside of incarceration. And then I've spent the past 2 years watching people go backwards because they like walk by the library and then they read it, but they don't realize what they read. And I don't know, but like, have you ever been in a neighborhood and just seen the word abolition? Probably not. So then they go backwards and then they read it again. And I've watched like Jehovah's Witnesses and moms and teens like process what the words were saying to them. And sometimes people open up and they take stuff and sometimes they don't. We had somebody organize it. We have people put, and like since I put the sign up, we have not had another book about police go in. So people have brought Palestinian coloring pages and they've brought seeds and they've brought they've brought all these things, but they've like respected that that's what it is. Somebody cleared out their kids' whole like childhood library and brought all of those in, and they were like, these are for you. And they were like half in Spanish and half in English. And it's like, that is co-created. Like I don't control the whole thing. The people around me have opted into participating by both taking books and putting other things in. And that is a project that we're doing with people I don't even know their names, right? Like people who just swing by once in a while and grab stuff and then bring it to their community. Like, what are you doing in your neighborhood to invite collaboration with people, even if it's really small, even if you don't necessarily see it, it shifts the environment around you.
Yeah.
Like I have a yard, so I can do certain things bigger, but I'm like, if you have a porch, if you have a window, like how are you using the spaces that you're in to invite people into creating with you instead of just being like, and here's this book that you have to read and then read this theory book? Because the other thing is that if your brain is in full blown fight, flight, freeze, fawn, you can't read information. Reading is a higher level thinking like process. Your brain is not going to be able to be in a cognitive space to actually take in theory like from a written text if you're in a panic space. So
And
how are we also getting people to move? Yeah, go.
yeah. No, but for real, and also a lot of people don't know how to read. That's a real
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That's not being
Yes.
elitist. That's a real fucking thing because of how good the state is. And so I think we do, all of us. I've had to check myself too and being like, you can go Google that and read it. God damn, Google's a hot fucking mess now too, because the first thing that pops up is all that AI bullshit.
Rain.
And
Yes.
AI ain't smart, y'all. Please stop giving your intelligence up to AI that was created by humans who are flawed. You are using it, you are
Yes.
using a technology made by another creator. So always look at who created what, right? And so I do think that, like,
Yes.
with that, so that's your idea of the book that you, or your workbook, right? The book that you kind of, you say you wrote, but you were questioning, should you say you wrote it or not? I think that that is what we have to move into, is that the idea of what is
Yeah.
written, the idea of concepts of intelligence and where we learn from, who we learn from, has to be questioned. And I say that with a lot
Yeah.
of nuance, y'all. I'm not saying to throw out the bathwater all of what we already know, okay? I know people want to decolonize education and decolonize higher ed, but decolonization is not the opposite of colonization. It's another way.
Mm-hmm.
It's understanding what the colonial is and then shifting it. And I think that that is why we have to come back to understanding that playlists are learning, right? Because songs are stories and stories tell us
Yes.
histories, right? Seeing color does invoke certain things, like you're saying, right? The idea
Yeah.
of having questions that aren't just stuck on a page, that are stagnant, that actually move in the pages, right? Allows you to
Yeah.
understand you have to move through your emotions. So I think
Yes.
the creation that you created is a way to help others learn how to get into their creative being, right? So it's like you can't use
Yes.
a non-creative modality to get people to create. You know what I mean? Like,
So valid.
it
Oh,
doesn't make no
yes.
sense.
And the other thing is, like, one of the things that I say when I'm working with people is that I take on an artist mindset. And one of the things that, like, a real artist understands is, like, just because the iterative process, you're going to do it a lot of times. And there are going to be things about every time that you do it that are better than that other time, but it doesn't mean that they all were perfect at the same time.
Mhm.
And I think that we have to be in real connection with our iterative processes as people who are committed to abolition, who are committed to a liberated world, who are committed to a vision of a, like a pleasurable existence on this planet in these bodies. And these are going to mess up. And like my kid right now is learning this in real time. They're like, if I do this, I might mess up. And I'm like, you've messed up so many times before already. Like you've already messed up like so many times. Like you're going to keep messing up. And I think about how sometimes you ever go to write the word the and you're like, I don't know if I did it right. Like you really like you've been writing too much and you type out THE and you're like, that doesn't spell the word the. I think I missed a letter in there. It's like just because we do something a lot doesn't mean we get to a point where it's perfect. And that's true about the colonial state too. Because I saw somebody recently who was like, why don't we just think about Trump as being like really lucky too? Like that he has this weird gift that he is also positioning himself in such a way and like he's getting lucky. But part of getting lucky is you do stuff enough. Because how many times have you said to yourself, like, why is this man even doing this? Right? Like he's part of an iterative process. He did an iterative process. And I think it's sometimes worthwhile to look at like your competitors, right? Look at the people look at your oppressors, look at the people and like, what are the strategies that they're using? Because newsflash, most oppressive strategies are just like funhouse mirror versions of liberatory strategies. And one of them that the first strategy that I feel like y'all quit immediately is iteration and doing it the fuck again.
And
Falling flat on your face, failing big time, dealing with the consequences, learning from the consequences, and then doing it again. And like that to me is the most. Somebody said, like, you never fail. I was like, I fail
all the
1,000
time.
times. I fail constantly. And they're
Mhm.
like, right, but you don't actually fail because you don't stop. And I was like, well, why would I stop? If I already failed 10 times, I might as well keep going. I might as well keep trying it out. Right. And I really need some of us, like, as far as like thick skin, that's the actual thick skin I need a lot of people who are invested in liberatory visions to do is I need you to get cool with your grief and your self-accountability and your failure so that you get to the point where you start imagining, because every time you fail a thing, it gives you information, right? We're walking around with these supercomputers that like have great pattern recognition skills and have the ability to like plug in data, and you guys give the like 1700 oppressive data points and 2 liberatory data points and are confused why your actions are harmful.
Yes.
Like, practice the shit. Give your mind and your spirit and your community some actual data to work with, so you can say, actually, I know what's gonna help. I actually know that like if I attack this person this way, it doesn't work. But if I slide in this sneaky ass way, I will definitely get under their skin.
Ah,
I can make some groundwork if I move this other way.
listen, now you're getting into the thick of it. It's what I like to do, because this is in order for us to do this though, not only do you have to be okay with failure, but you also got to be okay with not always broadcasting everything you're doing and being seen. Right? That's the other thing too, because you're talking about what a visionary is, right? And both of us work with visionaries. Both of us are visionaries. And the thing is, like,
Yeah.
I tell a visionary all the time, like, it's about understanding your light. And when you are trying to go towards your light, when you're trying to go toward the thing that you see, you have to fully trust yourself, which means that you are going to have to be okay being by yourself sometimes. You are going to have to be okay walking through, and you have to go through the dark. You can't find your light until you go through your dark. That is
Yeah.
some corny shit. That is not some love and light shit. That is some Scorpio shit. So you talking about
Yeah.
Scorpio rising. You gotta go to the depth of the depths of the underworld in order to find who the fuck you are. Right. And I think that's what visionaries do, because the failure is the feedback, right? I
Yes.
applied, you know how many goddamn grants I had to apply to before I got funded for my dissertation? 14 of those motherfuckers. I applied 14 times over two
Ooh.
years for grants. And I was told all the time, every single one, that I was too interdisciplinary, that I was looking, and this is early 2000s, y'all. Remember, this is early 2000s, when people really did think that they had moved beyond race. This was also a thing too, and
Mhm.
I was right in the middle of that shit. I was told that
Mhm.
the concepts that I was looking at were outdated already, right? I was literally looking at the relationship between race, the state, and citizenship pre-Brexit in the UK. Okay. I was told what I was doing didn't make any sense. 14 applications later, I was funded by the National Science Foundation as a goddamn sociocultural anthropologist because of my
Mm.
methodological training, right? I figured
Mhm.
out the system. Every rejection I got, I learned what it actually meant to write a grant. They don't give a fuck about what your project is. They want to hear themselves in your work. Once I
Mhm.
figured out what they needed, NSF wanted methodology. They wanted to know that your methods were sound, where I was trained by some of the most methodologies people in the goddamn discipline. I'm like, I need to use the damn trauma for something. So I used all that fucked up training, transmuted that bitch, wrote a grant, and got
Yes.
funded. But also got funded by one of the highest agencies to be funded as, in the face of everybody else telling me that my work was irrelevant.
Yes.
Right. So that's the
Yes.
vision, because if I had listened to everybody else, I wouldn't even left Chicago.
But also the vision is also understanding that sometimes you're getting a no. My friends and I have just been talking about this recently. It's like you're getting a no because the people who are close to you sometimes do not want you to be as grand as you
Yes.
are.
And that's a real
And
thing too.
that's just like a
Real.
real thing, right? Like because of that, because of my neighborhood thing, back to the same thing.
Yeah.
Like you're making me, if you can do that big of a thing, then
Right.
you make me look bad because I'm going to look
Yes.
small in comparison to the big thing that you're doing. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes not even about being jealous of you
No.
or like anything about you. It's just like, I can't have you be that bright because now I'm confronted with, if am I being big enough?
I have to now
Right?
find my light. Your
Yes.
light is now forcing me to look at mine. And that is
Yes.
something that I'm going to say this with my whole motherfucking chest, especially to Black folks in institutional spaces. If you are a true visionary, you cannot shine your light in somebody else's house and expect
Mm,
them to want to see it. They will dim that shit so that their fucking light can shine. You have got to believe your reality, but also believe yourself. And if you
yes.
do that, and if you can build in somebody else's house, God damn it, you can build in your own. And I think that's what we're realizing now too. This idea of Black women ain't gonna, taking your cape back. That's cute and all, y'all. But I want to say this too. That's real cute and y'all. But you can only take a cape back that you actually put out there to begin with.
Mhm.
And we need to also say that shit too, because a lot of times we're performing the aesthetic of Black womanhood, but many people are not embodied that shit,
Yeah.
right? And we're not at a
Yeah.
time in which we got to stop commodifying ourselves. That's the way we commodify
Yes.
ourselves, by
And then
saying it that way.
capitalism owns whatever thing that we're doing because we've
Thank
decided
you.
that it is also, listen, it's not easy because at the end of the day, you still have bills to pay, you still have shit to do. And so you're
Yes.
trying to figure out, we're all trying to negotiate these things. There is no perfection, right? There is no perfection, but
So,
how do I get close to the ideal?
you know
How do
how
I
to do
get
that?
closer to the ideal?
And you know what I think you have to way you have to do that, honestly, and this is where it's gonna piss some of y'all off, you gotta be a heathen.
Mm.
You gotta be a heathen because trying to be perfect, trying to sit within what is right, the definition of right we are using is not right for us. So what does it look like if we actually were messy? If we were actually allowing ourselves to not just fail, but to try possibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really in doing so, then what will that allow us to create? And if you do that, that's where we're gonna move differently. And I think that's what scares people. That's fair. It's very fair, but we're already in change. It's already here.
Well, that's like, I'm like, I told you once that I'm a chaos worker.
Yeah.
And after the election, I tapped into my elders and my ancestors, and I was like, y'all, how am I gonna, and they said, why would we make you a chaos worker in times of calm? And I was like, that's rude. That's a rude thing to say. Like, I get it. I get it. But like things are already changing and
Yeah.
things are already chaotic. And one of the wonderful things about imagination and strategy and just going for the big thing is that it's more likely to happen when everything's falling apart.
Yes.
And it's like, you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
if you made like a block tower and the block tower fell apart, and the first person who gets over there and starts making a new tower is going to be able to make what they make. Right? If you sit there and look at all the blocks on the ground and like cry about it, somebody else is already going to be halfway through their next block tower before you even get to work. And so one
Yes.
of the things about these moments when things fall, they fall for everyone. It's
Yes.
chaotic for everybody.
Yes.
You know what I mean? An earthquake doesn't just shake up some people, it shakes up everybody. And so the people who are ready to respond to moments of chaos with a dream and with an idea and with imagination and strategy. I have a friend. Wait, one second. I want to share this, but I want to make sure that it was already announced and I don't get in trouble. I'm just checking what time it was getting announced so I knew. Um, after 11 a.m. Okay, yes. So I have a friend that works in abortion care. And they have already they launched today a free legal hotline for abortion care for people to figure out what they can and can't do in Connecticut, including Connecticut has shored up their laws so that if you like don't live in Connecticut and you come to Connecticut to get abortion care, Connecticut is trying to make sure that people are protected to do that and that our practitioners here are protected to do that, right? And so they already have a legal hotline ready to go, including the person that took down Alex Jones is on this hotline of lawyers that you could like call and like get advice from, right? They're only able to do that. And like we're days out from the election where other people are again urgency or stagnating or urgency. But my friend was like, we were prepared. We're ready to get shit up. We're ready to do things because people are going to need to have conversations about if nonprofits all lose their tax statuses, what are you doing with all those billions of dollars you have? What are you doing with all your money? If all of these rules start changing, what rules are you willing to break? What rules are you willing to write in the absence of other rules being present? And like in these moments of chaos, y'all are still trying to play by some monopoly shit, which is why I constantly let my kid cheat because I'm like, cheat for the betterment of this. Like, I want you to cheat, but you better convince me that it was a good way to cheat. You know what I mean? You better show me the strategy. And again, this is not stuff that we just broadcast all the time. We don't like, here's a how to video to break the law. Like, that's not shit that you do, right? People were drawing their curtains when they were having meetings about like marches. Like we have to know that the thing that we are doing is right without the reliance of this like very look at me culture that the state has propped up so that you go online and you say some crazy shit. So
Yes.
it's like be imaginative, be visionary, but also be connected to your community and to the people around you so that you don't need to go online and talk about it. You could just actually be inside of the practice.
Yes. Because let's be real, if we don't create in this chaos, somebody else will. And
Somebody's
I think
creating something.
somebody's creating something. It always happens. And history has shown us that over and over again. When the Soviet Union collapsed, billionaires were made. The Russian
Yes.
oligarchy was created that day because people were ready. Those billionaires were ready. The minute them fucking companies went private and they were able to go on that stock market, billions. Right? Housing crash market, that was chaos. People forget '08. I think people really do forget the what '08 to '10 did. It was awful. It really actually was
Yes.
economically awful. People made millions in that chaos. They had
Yes.
bet on people losing everything, right? So we already know the imaginations of those who will benefit their own personal selves and their own bloodlines when we have these chaotic locations. So we better think about what does it mean to allow our bloodlines to collectively to finally live instead of being beholden to the new oligarch, the new technocrat, right? The new chaos
Yeah.
agent who made that chaos for them, right? And I think that is so the importance
Yeah.
of liberatory strategic dreaming right now.
And to say that it's possible,
Yeah.
if they can forgive a bank, if they can
Yeah.
forgive like however many huge companies they forgave during COVID lockdown, it is not that there isn't money, there is not
Mhm.
that there isn't ability, there is actually a way, there are practical ways that the state, if it continues to exist, can do shit for you, and you have the power to say, if the state cannot do that shit for me, then I am not interested in continuing to work for the state. And how do I actually start building a different thing so that I'm not under this thumb that could give me a carrot, but instead is giving me shit?
Yes. So this is why we always say only we can save ourselves. And so
100%.
and so I think let's go ahead and kind of wrap this up a bit because this will be a
Yeah.
beautiful conversation. So and at the beginning of the episode, I did give you all Christiana's information along with the newest the workbook essentially
Yeah.
that she created. And so, Christiana, can you also explain how people can connect with you? Anything that you would like them to know that you're working on now to look forward to? And I'm asking all my guests this season to give me a song that embodies the moment that they're in right now. And for you, it's
Ooh.
kind of think about a song that, for one song at least for you, that can help people understand why it's important to imagine it as a way of liberation right now. So, yeah, go ahead.
Woo. Okay. So now I'm hyper fixated about the song, but let me give myself a second. Let me give me a second. I was like open to check out all my music. Um so I am Mocha Einstein 27 on all platforms that I'm on, which is just really TikTok and Instagram. Um all platforms. I have a Patreon, that's my first name, Kristianna. Uh and on my Patreon, I have a plethora of things. I have workbooks. I am starting like a digital like virtual workshops, so like videos that you just walk through yourself and like do the workshop yourself. And in the new year we're going to be doing like my personal group of books that I read to like recharge my imagination and think about strategy. So there's going to be like a whole curriculum based on like books and imagination work together. There's probably going to be a couple of television shows in there and maybe some podcasts. Let's say it's media because I take in a lot of different types of media. And then if you want to buy my book, it's at harvestingchaos.com. I'm doing a reprint right now. By the time that this has gone up, I will have done the reprint. And so as many are available. And then like I'll just start a pre-order for the next reprint. And one of the things that I love about my book is that it was completely cultivated by like queer, black, like femmes and non-binary people, and there's a couple indigenous creators as well, but it's like all people, like all the people that I feel like we should be listening to, they are not just my friends, but they are really like visionaries in their own right. And so it's like all of this wisdom from my village that like I hope goes out and seeds wisdom for other villages and affirmation. Like I really hope that when people pick up the book, one of the things they feel is validated and supported in these moments where we're doing the thing by ourselves and we have to be like working under the radar and we have to be relying on that our own light that we have internally. This book is intended to like really support people in those moments so that they can think to themselves like, what is the greatest thing that I can do in this moment within my capacity and accomplish quickly. So yeah, that's where you can find me, and I would love to, chat with you and connect with you. And I'm so thankful. This was such a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. And then the I'm just gonna go with the first song that came to me. The first song that came to me is the Leanne Lahavas cover of Weird Fishes, because it is heartbreaking and beautiful and creative all at the same time. And that has very much been this season for me, which is like, I sing it sometimes when I'm like, when I feel like my heart is breaking. Her runs in it are really beautiful. But I think that it also like deeply gives this, this like desire and reality that we have to escape where we are right now, right? And that we have to move from where we are right now. And then like also just like I get eaten by the worms and weird fishes, like this idea that we are stuck being drowned by this stupid colonial system that is trying to kill us, and like we gotta get the fuck out. And so like that's really been like my go-to recently, so that's gonna be the one that I share.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much. So, the folks have been tuning in this season. Everyone is giving me a song. And so at the end of the season, I'll have a playlist that will essentially be folks' abolitionist dreamscapes for the stories that they want to create at the margins and archive. So be on the lookout for that. All right. So thanks again, Kristianna, for your time and for your imagining and for your dreams, honestly, that you're willing to share. And I think that we need to have more of those dreams in the public. So as always, y'all, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscapes that we can bring the futures we want to bring to fruition in the present day. Till next time.